In the summer of 2023, while Silicon Valley celebrated the dawn of artificial intelligence and automated everything, a 28-year-old cybersecurity analyst named Elena Vasquez was hunched over a machine that most people would mistake for a museum piece. The computer hummed with the distinctive whir of cooling fans that had been spinning since before she was born. Its beige tower case bearing scuff marks and coffee stains that told stories of decades in service. The green phosphor monitor cast an eerie glow across her face as lines of code scrolled past in amber text, each character rendered in the blocky font that defined computing's early years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena worked alone in the basement of Meridian Financial, a mid-tier investment firm that occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle. While her colleagues upstairs relied on cutting-edge AI-powered security suites that promised to detect threats faster than any human could think, Elena maintained what everyone else considered digital archaeology: the IBM System 370 mainframe. Beside her desk had been processing financial transactions since 1987, and its companion DEC PDP-11 minicomputer had been faithfully logging network activity for almost as long. The irony wasn't lost on her that while the company spent millions on machine learning algorithms designed to predict and prevent cyber attacks, they kept her in the basement babysitting computers that predated the internet as most people knew it. Her official title was Legacy Systems Administrator, a role that had been created specifically to manage the handful of ancient machines that still handled critical but mundane tasks: payroll processing, backup transaction logging, and compliance. Archiving were considered too boring for the sophisticated AI systems that monitored the glamorous world of real-time trading and threat detection. Elena had discovered these forgotten machines during her first week on the job, relegated to a storage room that doubled as the building's emergency generator housing. The previous administrator had retired without proper documentation, leaving behind a collection of hardware that nobody quite understood, but nobody dared to disconnect. The machines ran quietly and efficiently, processing their assigned tasks without fanfare or recognition, much like Elena herself. Her background made her uniquely suited for the role, though it wasn't the kind of expertise that impressed hiring managers or warranted corner offices. She had grown up in a household where her father repaired televisions and radios, teaching her that understanding how things worked was more valuable than simply knowing how to use them. While her classmates learned programming on Windows PCs and Macs, Elena spent summers in her father's workshop, troubleshooting circuits and reading service manuals for equipment that manufacturers had stopped supporting years earlier. This foundation served her well when she encountered the legacy systems at Meridian. The documentation was sparse and often incorrect, written by programmers who had moved on to other companies or retired entirely. Elena learned to read the machines themselves, interpreting the patterns in their operation logs and understanding their quirks through patient observation. She developed a relationship with the hardware that went beyond mere technical competence, recognizing the subtle changes in fan noise that indicated temperature fluctuations, or the variations in disk activity that suggested memory optimization. Routines were running. The work was solitary and largely invisible to the rest of the organization. Elena arrived each morning to find printouts from overnight batch processes, reviewed transaction logs for anomalies, and performed maintenance tasks that kept the ancient systems running smoothly. Her reports were filed in digital folders that nobody read, and her recommendations for system improvements were acknowledged but never implemented. She had grown accustomed to being treated as a custodian rather than an analyst, someone who kept old things working rather than someone who understood why they mattered. The cybersecurity team that operated from the 3rd floor represented everything that Elena's work was not. They occupied an open-plan office filled with multiple monitors, standing desks, and the latest hardware that money could buy. Their AI-powered security orchestration platform was the crown jewel of the company's technology infrastructure, a system that cost more than Elena's annual salary and promised to revolutionize how financial institutions protected themselves from cyber threats. The security team was led by Marcus Chen, a former consultant who had built his reputation selling artificial intelligence solutions to companies that wanted to modernize their approach to cybersecurity. His presentations were filled with buzzwords about machine learning algorithms, behavioral analytics, and automated response capabilities that could neutralize threats before human operators even knew they existed. The system he had implemented at Meridian was supposed to be the future of digital defense, capable of processing millions of data points per second and identifying attack patterns that would be invisible to traditional security tools. Elena had attended several of Marcus's presentations during company-wide meetings, listening as he explained how artificial intelligence would eliminate the human error and oversight that made organizations vulnerable to sophisticated attacks. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed that newer always meant better, that complexity was inherently superior to simplicity, and that the solution to security challenges lay in deploying more advanced technology rather than understanding existing systems more deeply. The disconnect between Marcus's vision and Elena's daily reality was profound but rarely acknowledged. While the AI security system monitored network traffic and analyzed user behavior patterns, Elena's ancient computers continued their steady work in the basement, processing the same types of transactions they had handled for decades. The legacy systems were considered too primitive to require sophisticated monitoring, operating in what the security team called an air-gapped environment that made them irrelevant to modern threat landscapes. This assumption was both widespread and fundamentally incorrect, though Elena was one of the few people in the organization who understood why. The legacy systems weren't truly isolated from the network. They maintained necessary connections for data synchronization and backup operations. These connections were established using older protocols and communication standards that the modern AI security tools weren't designed to monitor. The artificial intelligence algorithms had been trained on contemporary attack patterns and network behaviors, leaving them blind to the subtle indicators that might suggest someone was targeting the older systems. Elena had tried to raise these concerns during security briefings, pointing out that the legacy systems represented potential vulnerabilities that weren't being adequately addressed by the current monitoring approach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her observations were met with polite dismissal from Marcus and his team, who explained that the older systems lacked the network connectivity and processing power that made them attractive targets for modern cybercriminals. The AI security platform was designed to focus on high-value, high-traffic systems where sophisticated attacks were most likely to occur. The condescension was subtle but persistent. During department meetings, Elena's questions were often answered with simplified explanations that assumed she didn't understand modern cybersecurity concepts. When she suggested that the legacy systems might require specialized monitoring approaches, the response was usually a patient lecture about how artificial intelligence had moved beyond the need for such granular, system-specific analysis. The implication was clear. Elena's expertise with older technology was admirable but irrelevant in an era where machine learning could identify threats across entire network infrastructures simultaneously. This dismissive attitude extended beyond the cybersecurity team to the broader organization. Elena's work was seen as necessary but unimportant, a maintenance function that kept old systems running until they could eventually be replaced with modern alternatives. Her insights about system behavior and potential vulnerabilities were treated as interesting historical observations, rather than actionable intelligence about current security risks. The combination of her junior position, her association with Outdated technology, and the general belief that artificial intelligence had made human analysis obsolete, created an environment where her concerns were systematically discounted. The physical separation reinforced this social isolation. While the cybersecurity team worked in a collaborative environment with glass-walled conference rooms and shared workspaces, Elena spent her days alone in the basement, surrounded by machines that hummed and whirred in mechanical symphony. The only regular human interaction came from building maintenance staff who occasionally needed access to utility panels, or from delivery personnel who used the basement loading dock. These brief encounters were friendly but superficial, lacking the professional collegiality that might have provided opportunities to share her observations about system behavior or security concerns. Elena compensated for this isolation by developing increasingly sophisticated methods for monitoring and analyzing the legacy systems under her care. She wrote custom scripts that could parse transaction logs for unusual patterns, created automated alerts that would notify her of performance anomalies, and maintained detailed documentation of system behavior that went far beyond what was required. For her role, this work was entirely self-directed, driven by her own curiosity and professional pride, rather than any organizational mandate or recognition. Her analysis methods were necessarily different from those used by the modern cybersecurity team. While the AI security platform relied on machine learning algorithms to identify patterns across vast datasets, Elena's approach was more focused and intuitive. She learned to recognize the normal rhythms of each legacy system, understanding how they responded to different types of workloads and how their performance varied with environmental conditions like temperature and power fluctuations. This intimate knowledge allowed her to detect subtle changes that might indicate problems or anomalies, even when those changes fell within the normal operating parameters that automated monitoring systems would consider acceptable. The ancient computers responded to her attention with the reliability that had made them valuable assets for decades. The IBM mainframe processed its daily batch jobs with mechanical precision, generating reports that Elena reviewed each morning for signs of unusual activity. The DEC minicomputer maintained its network logs with obsessive thoroughness, recording every connection attempt and data transfer with timestamp accuracy that modern systems often couldn't match. The other legacy machines in her care, including several Unix workstations and a collection of specialized terminals, continued their assigned tasks with the steady dependability that had justified their continued operation long after their manufacturers had stopped providing support. Elena's relationship with these systems was both professional and personal. She understood their limitations and appreciated their strengths, recognizing that their age and simplicity were assets rather than liabilities. In certain contexts, the older systems were less vulnerable to many modern attack vectors simply because they didn't support the complex features and network protocols that contemporary malware was designed to exploit. Their straightforward architectures made them easier to secure and monitor, though this required knowledge and techniques that were no longer taught in computer science programs or cybersecurity certification courses. This expertise made Elena uniquely qualified to notice when something began to change in the patterns she had come to know so well. It started subtly, with minor variations in processing times that fell within normal tolerances, but seemed somehow different when viewed over longer time periods. The IBM mainframe began taking slightly longer to complete certain batch jobs, not enough to trigger performance alerts, but sufficient to catch Elena's attention during her daily review routines. The DEC minicomputer showed occasional spikes in network activity that didn't correspond to scheduled backup operations or routine maintenance tasks. These anomalies were minor and intermittent, the kind of variations that automated monitoring systems would filter out as background noise. The AI security platform upstairs showed no alerts or concerns related to the legacy systems. continuing to focus its attention on the high-traffic network segments where it expected to find evidence of sophisticated attacks. Elena's initial reports about these observations were acknowledged but not investigated, filed away with the assumption that older systems naturally showed more variability in their performance as their components aged and their operating environments shifted. The dismissal of her concerns followed familiar patterns. During a monthly security briefing, Elena mentioned that she had noticed some unusual activity patterns in the legacy systems and suggested that they might warrant closer examination. Marcus responded with a brief explanation of how the AI security platform would automatically detect any significant threats to the network infrastructure, including any systems that might be showing signs of compromise or malicious activity. The implication was that Elena's manual analysis, however well-intentioned, was redundant in the face of sophisticated artificial intelligence that could monitor the entire network simultaneously. Other team members reinforced this perspective with comments about the efficiency of automated threat detection and the limitations of human analysis in complex network environments. Elena's observations were characterized as interesting but probably not significant, the kind of minor variations that were inevitable in older systems and unlikely to represent genuine security threats. The meeting moved on to discussions of new AI capabilities and emerging threat intelligence, leaving Elena's concerns unaddressed and her expertise unacknowledged. This pattern of dismissal was frustrating but familiar, reflecting the broader organizational culture that valued innovation over experience and automation over human judgment. Elena had learned to work within these constraints, documenting her observations and maintaining her vigilance even when others showed little interest in her findings. She understood that her role was seen as maintenance rather than analysis, custodial rather than investigative, but she continued to treat her work with the seriousness that she believed it deserved. The basement where Elena worked had become her domain, a space where she could focus on the details that others found boring or irrelevant. The constant background noise of cooling fans and disk drives created a mechanical rhythm that she found comforting, a steady soundtrack that accompanied her daily routines of system monitoring and maintenance. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across the equipment racks, but Elena had grown accustomed to the environment, finding beauty in the purposeful complexity of machines that had been designed when reliability mattered more than aesthetics. Her workstation was a hybrid of old and new technology, combining a modern laptop for documentation and communication with older terminals that provided direct access to the legacy systems. Multiple monitors displayed scrolling logs and system status information, creating an information-rich environment that allowed her to track the health and performance of dozens of different systems simultaneously. The setup was entirely her own creation, assembled over months of careful integration work that connected disparate systems in ways their original designers had never intended. The work itself was methodical and detail-oriented, requiring the kind of sustained attention that was becoming rare in an era of instant notifications and constant interruptions. Elena would spend hours analyzing transaction logs, looking for patterns that might indicate problems or anomalies. She reviewed system performance metrics, tracked resource utilization trends, and maintained detailed documentation of every significant event or change in system behavior. This information was stored in databases that she had created and maintained herself. Since the organization's standard information management systems weren't designed to handle the specific requirements of legacy system administration, her expertise had been developed through years of hands-on experience rather than formal training. Since most educational programs had moved beyond teaching the skills necessary to work with older systems, Elena had learned by doing, making mistakes and recovering from them, reading technical manuals and documentation that predated the internet, and developing an intuitive understanding of how these machines operated under different conditions. This knowledge was increasingly rare and valuable, though its value wasn't recognized by organizations that assumed newer technology was automatically superior to what it replaced. The isolation of her work was both a challenge and an advantage. While Elena missed the collaboration and professional interaction that might have come with a more visible role, the solitude allowed her to develop deep focus and attention, detail that would have been difficult to maintain in a more distracting environment. She could spend entire days immersed in system analysis, following subtle clues and patterns that might lead to important discoveries about system behavior or potential problems. This sustained attention was essential for the kind of work she did, since the legacy systems revealed their secrets gradually to those who took the time to listen carefully. Elena had developed her own methodologies for analyzing system behavior, techniques that combined traditional system administration practices with more modern data analysis approaches. She created custom scripts that could process log files and generate reports that highlighted unusual patterns or anomalies. She built monitoring dashboards that displayed system health information in ways that made it easier to spot trends or changes over time. These tools were tailored specifically to the systems she managed, taking advantage of her detailed knowledge of their normal operating characteristics to identify deviations that might be significant. The ancient computers responded to this careful attention with reliable performance that justified Elena's faith in their continued value. The IBM mainframe had been processing financial transactions for over 3 decades without a significant failure, maintaining an uptime record that newer systems struggled to match. The DEC minicomputer had faithfully logged network activity through multiple hardware upgrades and software changes, creating an archive of information that provided valuable historical context for understanding current system behavior. The other legacy systems continued their specialized tasks with the steady dependability that had made them indispensable to the organization's operations. This reliability was both a strength and a weakness from a security perspective. The system's consistent behavior made it easier to detect anomalies that might indicate problems or attacks, but their stable operation also made them less visible to security teams that were focused on more dynamic and actively changing parts of the network. Infrastructure. The II security platform was designed to identify threats by analyzing patterns of change and variation, making it less effective at monitoring systems that changed slowly and subtly over long periods of time. Elena understood this limitation and compensated for it through her own analysis and monitoring efforts. She maintained baselines of normal system behavior that were more detailed and nuanced than what automated tools could provide, allowing her to detect subtle changes that might be invisible to less focused monitoring approaches. Her work complemented the organization's other security measures, filling gaps that existed because the AI systems weren't designed to handle the specific characteristics of legacy technology. The value of this complementary approach became apparent gradually through Elena's growing awareness that something was changing in the patterns she monitored so carefully. The anomalies she had begun to notice were subtle but persistent, suggesting that someone or something was probing the legacy systems in ways that weren't being detected by the organization's primary security infrastructure. The changes were small enough to avoid triggering automated alerts, but consistent enough to indicate deliberate activity rather than random system variation. Elena's attempts to communicate these observations to the cybersecurity team were met with the same polite dismissal that had characterized previous interactions. Her concerns were acknowledged but not acted upon, filed away with the assumption that the AI security platform would detect any genuine threats automatically. The organizational culture that valued automation over human analysis made it difficult for Elena to gain credibility for observations that couldn't be easily quantified or replicated by machine learning algorithms. This dismissive response drove Elena to intensify her own analysis efforts, documenting the anomalies she observed with greater precision and detail. She began maintaining separate logs of suspicious activity, tracking patterns that seemed too consistent to be coincidental, but too subtle to trigger formal security protocols. Her work became increasingly focused and systematic, driven by a growing conviction that something important was happening in the digital shadows, where her ancient computers continued their quiet work. The basement environment that housed Elena's workspace began to feel more like a fortress than an office, a place where she could continue her vigilant monitoring while the rest of the organization remained focused on more glamorous and visible security challenges. The mechanical sounds of cooling fans and spinning disks created a steady background rhythm that accompanied her, deepening investigation into patterns that others had dismissed as irrelevant noise. Elena knew that the truth was often hidden in details that seemed insignificant to casual observers, and she was prepared to dig as deep as necessary to understand what her ancient computers were trying to tell her about the digital threats that were slowly taking shape in their electronic memories. The first concrete evidence that Elena's instincts were correct came on a Thursday morning in late September, hidden within the routine printouts that emerged from the IBM mainframe's overnight batch processing cycle. The reports looked identical to the hundreds she had reviewed over the previous months, filled with columns of transaction data, system performance metrics, and routine maintenance logs that documented the steady work the ancient machine performed while the rest of the building slept. Elena had developed a systematic approach to reviewing these reports, scanning first for obvious anomalies before diving into the detailed analysis that might reveal more subtle patterns. Her eyes moved across the pages with practiced efficiency, noting the familiar rhythms of transaction processing, backup operations, and system maintenance routines that had remained consistent for years. But on this particular morning, something caught her attention in the network activity logs that the DEC minicomputer generated as part of its ongoing monitoring duties. The anomaly was small, almost invisible among the thousands of entries that documented routine network communications between the legacy systems and the rest of the organization's infrastructure. A series of connection attempts had been made to the mainframe's terminal interface, using authentication credentials that were technically valid, but had never been used for this particular type of access. The attempts were spaced irregularly, over several hours, each one lasting just long enough to establish a connection before disconnecting without performing any obvious activities. Elena cross-referenced these connection attempts with the access logs, maintained by the organization's primary security systems, expecting to find corresponding entries that would explain the unusual activity. Instead, she discovered that the AI security platform had no record of these connections, despite the fact that they had traversed network segments that were supposedly under constant monitoring. The artificial intelligence algorithms had classified the activity as routine system maintenance, filtering it out of their threat analysis processes because it didn't match any known attack patterns in their training datasets. This discovery prompted Elena to expand her analysis, searching through weeks of archived logs to determine whether similar activity had occurred previously. She found a pattern of subtle probing that stretched back nearly 2 months, each incident carefully disguised as legitimate system activity, but following a progression that suggested someone was methodically exploring the legacy system's vulnerabilities. The attacks were sophisticated in their restraint, avoiding the obvious intrusion techniques that would trigger automated alerts while gradually mapping the system's capabilities and defenses. Elena documented her findings in a detailed report that included timeline analysis, technical specifications of the unauthorized access attempts, and recommendations for additional monitoring measures that could help identify the source of the intrusions. She scheduled a meeting with Marcus Chun and his cybersecurity team, hoping that concrete evidence of ongoing attacks would overcome their previous reluctance to take her observations seriously. The meeting took place in the third-floor conference room that served as the cybersecurity team's primary briefing space. Surrounded by wall-mounted monitors displaying real-time security dashboards and threat intelligence feeds, Elena felt out of place in this sleek environment, carrying her printed reports and handwritten analysis notes into a room designed for digital presentations and collaborative software tools. Marcus and 3 of his senior analysts listened politely as Elena presented her findings, but their expressions remained skeptical throughout her presentation. Marcus's response was immediate and dismissive. The connection attempts Elena had identified were consistent with automated system maintenance routines that the legacy systems performed as part of their normal operations. The AI security platform had correctly classified these activities as non-threatening, using sophisticated behavioral analysis that could distinguish between genuine attacks and routine system functions. Elena's manual analysis, while thorough, was based on incomplete information and lacked the comprehensive network visibility that only modern security tools could provide. The other team members reinforced this assessment with technical explanations about false positive rates in security monitoring and the importance of focusing investigative resources on high-probability threats. They acknowledged Elena's diligence in monitoring the legacy systems, but suggested that her unfamiliarity with contemporary attack methodologies had led her to misinterpret normal system behavior as malicious activity. The meeting concluded with polite thanks for Elena's vigilance and assurances that the AI security platform would alert them to any genuine threats that required investigation. Elena left the meeting frustrated, but not surprised by the response she had received. The cybersecurity team's confidence in their artificial intelligence systems was absolute, creating a blind spot that prevented them from considering the possibility that their automated tools might be missing something important. She understood that challenging this confidence directly would be counterproductive, so she decided to intensify her own monitoring efforts while building a more comprehensive case that would be harder to dismiss. Her investigation took on a new sense of urgency as Elena realized that the attacks were not random probing, but part of a systematic campaign to compromise the legacy systems. The intruders had been careful to avoid detection by modern security tools, but they had left traces that were visible to someone who understood how the older systems operated and communicated. Elena began spending longer hours in the basement, arriving early and staying late to monitor system activity during off-peak periods when suspicious behavior was most likely to occur. The ancient computers became her allies in this investigation. Their detailed login capabilities and predictable behavior patterns making it easier to identify anomalies that suggested unauthorized access. The IBM mainframe's transaction processing logs revealed subtle timing variations that indicated someone was intercepting and analyzing financial data as it moved through the system. The DEC minicomputer's network monitoring showed evidence of traffic analysis tools that were mapping the connections between legacy systems and the broader organizational infrastructure. Elena developed new monitoring tools specifically designed to detect the type of stealthy intrusions she was observing, creating custom scripts that could identify suspicious patterns in network traffic and system access logs. These tools were necessarily different from the signature-based detection methods used by commercial security software, focusing instead on behavioral analysis that could identify activities that deviated from established normal baselines. The approach required detailed knowledge of system behavior that could only be gained through months of careful observation and analysis. Her work revealed a growing sophistication in the attacks against the legacy systems. The intruders had progressed from simple reconnaissance to more complex operations that suggested they were preparing for a larger compromise attempt. Elena found evidence of data exfiltration tools that had been quietly installed on several systems, programs designed to capture and transmit sensitive information without triggering standard security alerts. The tools were carefully crafted to blend in with normal system operations, using communication protocols and timing patterns that wouldn't attract attention from automated monitoring systems. Elena's attempts to escalate these findings through normal organizational channels continued to meet resistance from the cybersecurity team and senior management. Her reports were acknowledged but not acted upon, filed away with the assumption that the AI security platform would detect any genuine threats automatically. The organizational culture that prioritized technological solutions over human expertise made it difficult for Elena to gain credibility for her manual analysis methods, even when those methods were producing evidence that sophisticated automated tools were missing. The isolation of Elena's work became both a challenge and an advantage as she pursued her investigation. While the lack of support from colleagues was frustrating, the solitude allowed her to develop deep focus and systematic analysis techniques that might have been impossible in a more collaborative environment. She could spend hours following subtle digital trails, analyzing patterns that revealed themselves gradually to patient observation, and building comprehensive documentation of attack methods that were invisible to less focused monitoring approaches. The basement environment where Elena worked began to feel like a command center for a secret war that only she could see. The mechanical sounds of the legacy systems created a steady soundtrack for her investigation, while the walls lined with equipment racks and cable runs provided physical reminders of the complex infrastructure that connected these ancient machines to the modern world. Elena had transformed her workspace into a monitoring station that rivaled the capabilities of the third-floor cybersecurity center, using older but more targeted tools to achieve insights that sophisticated AI systems had missed. Her relationship with the legacy systems deepened as Elena recognized that their apparent obsolescence was actually a form of protection. The ancient computers operated using protocols and communication methods that were no longer taught in computer science programs, making them less vulnerable to standard attack techniques, but also less visible to security tools designed for contemporary technology. The attackers she was tracking had recognized this blind spot and were exploiting it systematically, using knowledge of older systems to conduct intrusions that modern security infrastructure couldn't detect. Elena's analysis revealed that the attackers possessed sophisticated understanding of legacy system architecture and communication protocols, suggesting they were not typical cybercriminals, but rather specialists with deep technical knowledge of older computer systems. Their methods were patient and methodical, designed to avoid detection while gradually building the access and capabilities needed for a major compromise attempt. The timeline of their activities suggested they were preparing for something significant, possibly timed to coincide with a major financial event or organizational change. The weight of this knowledge became increasingly heavy as Elena realized that she might be the only person in the organization who understood the scope and sophistication of the threat they were facing. The AI security platform that everyone else trusted was blind to attacks that exploited gaps in its training data and behavioral models. The cybersecurity team's confidence in their technological solutions had created a dangerous vulnerability that sophisticated attackers were exploiting. With growing boldness, Elena's documentation of the attacks became increasingly detailed and comprehensive as she worked to build an irrefutable case that would force the organization to take action. She created timeline charts showing the progression of intrusion activities, technical analysis reports explaining how the attackers were exploiting specific system vulnerabilities, and risk assessments that outlined the potential consequences of a successful compromise of the legacy systems. Her work went far beyond what was required for her role, driven by professional responsibility and growing alarm about the threats she was uncovering. The ancient computers continued their steady work throughout Elena's investigation, processing transactions and maintaining logs with the same reliability they had demonstrated for decades. But their consistency now served a different purpose. providing stable baselines against which Elena could measure the subtle changes that indicated ongoing attacks. The machines had become both the target of sophisticated intrusions and the tools Elena needed to detect and analyze those intrusions. Their detailed logging capabilities and predictable behavior patterns, making them ideal sensors for the kind of patient, methodical investigation that the situation required. As autumn deepened and the attacks against the legacy systems became more frequent and sophisticated, Elena prepared for what she suspected would be a final attempt to convince her colleagues that their organization was facing a serious and immediate threat. She knew that her next presentation would need to be compelling enough to overcome months of skepticism and organizational bias toward technological solutions. The evidence she had gathered was solid and comprehensive, but presenting it effectively would require her to challenge assumptions and expertise that formed the foundation of her colleagues' professional identities. The basement where Elena worked had become her fortress and laboratory, a place where ancient wisdom in the form of reliable old computers provided insights that cutting-edge artificial intelligence had missed. The steady hum of cooling fans and the soft clicking of mechanical disk drives created a meditative environment where Elena could focus on the details that others found boring or irrelevant. She understood that the truth was often hidden in places where others refused to look, and she was prepared to continue her vigilant investigation, regardless of whether anyone else appreciated the importance of her work. The legacy systems that surrounded Elena had become more than just the tools of her trade. They were partners in an investigation that was revealing the limitations of over-reliance on automated solutions and the continued value of human expertise in understanding complex technical systems. The ancient computers held secrets that only patient observation could unlock, and Elena was determined to decode their messages before the attackers could complete whatever operation they were planning in the digital shadows, where old technology continued its quiet but essential work. The October morning when Elena discovered the back door felt different from the moment she entered the basement. The familiar mechanical symphony of cooling fans and disk drives seemed more urgent somehow, as if the ancient computers were trying to communicate something beyond their normal operational status reports. She had arrived earlier than usual, drawn by an intuition that had been building over the past several days as the suspicious network activity intensified in both frequency and complexity. Elena's investigation had evolved into something resembling digital forensics, though she lacked the formal training and expensive tools that characterize professional cybercrime investigation. Instead, she relied on intimate knowledge of her systems and improvised analysis techniques that turned the legacy computers' detailed logging capabilities into a powerful investigative resource. The ancient machines recorded everything with obsessive thoroughness, creating digital trails that were invisible to modern security tools, but readable to someone who understood their archaic data formats and storage methods. The breakthrough came while Elena was analyzing traffic patterns on the DEC minicomputer's network interface, searching for anomalies in the timing and routing of data packets that moved between the legacy systems and the rest of the organizational infrastructure. She had developed a custom monitoring script that could parse the machine's binary log files and translate them into readable format, revealing details about network communications that the AI security platform treated as routine. Background noise. Hidden within what appeared to be normal system synchronization traffic, Elena found evidence of a sophisticated command and control channel that had been operating undetected for weeks. The channel used modified versions of standard network protocols, embedding command codes within routine data transfers in ways that would be invisible to signature-based detection systems. The modifications were subtle but consistent, suggesting that whoever had implemented them possessed deep technical knowledge of both the legacy system's communication methods and the blind spots in modern security monitoring. Elena traced the command channel back to its source, following digital breadcrumbs through multiple network hops and proxy servers that had been established to obscure the true origin of the communications. The trail led through a series of compromised systems in different geographic locations, each one serving as a relay point that made the ultimate source more difficult to identify. The sophistication of this infrastructure suggested that the attacks were not the work of opportunistic cybercriminals, but rather a well-resourced and technically sophisticated organization with specific objectives. The discovery of the command and control channel prompted Elena to expand her investigation, searching for additional evidence of the attackers' presence within the legacy systems. She found traces of reconnaissance tools that had been quietly cataloging system configurations, user accounts, and security measures across the entire network of ancient computers. The tools were designed to be invisible to both automated monitoring and casual human observation, operating during low activity periods and mimicking normal system processes to avoid detection. More disturbing was Elena's discovery that the attackers had gained administrative access to several critical legacy systems, including the IBM mainframe that processed the organization's most sensitive financial transactions. The compromise had been achieved through careful exploitation of configuration weaknesses and authentication bypasses that were specific to older system architectures. The attackers had avoided making obvious changes that would trigger security alerts, instead establishing persistent access mechanisms that would allow them to return whenever they chose. Elena documented these findings with increasing urgency, recognizing that the organization was facing a sophisticated and ongoing attack that had already achieved significant penetration of critical systems. Her analysis revealed that the attackers possessed not only technical expertise but also detailed knowledge of the organization's operational procedures and system dependencies. They had targeted the legacy system specifically because they understood that these machines were less visible to modern security tools while still maintaining access to sensitive data and critical business processes. The evidence Elena had gathered painted a picture of patient, methodical attackers who had spent months mapping the organization's digital infrastructure and establishing the access and capabilities needed for a major operation. The timeline of their activity suggested they were building toward something significant, possibly a large-scale data theft or system disruption, timed to maximize impact and minimize the likelihood of detection. The sophistication of their methods indicated they were likely state-sponsored actors or highly skilled criminal organizations with substantial resources and technical capabilities. Elena's attempts to communicate the severity of these discoveries to the cybersecurity team met with the same skepticism and dismissal that had characterized previous interactions. Marcus Chun and his colleagues remained convinced that their AI security platform would detect any genuine threats automatically, dismissing Elena's evidence as the result of overzealous analysis of routine system activity. They pointed out that the artificial intelligence algorithms were designed specifically to identify the types of advanced persistent threats that Elena was describing, and the absence of alerts from these systems indicated that no such threats were present. The circular logic of this reasoning was maddening but predictable. The AI security platform was trusted because it was sophisticated and expensive, and its failure to detect the attacks Elena had identified was taken as proof that no attacks were actually occurring. Elena's manual analysis was dismissed as inferior to automated detection, despite the fact that she was uncovering evidence that the automated systems were missing. The organizational culture that prioritized technological solutions over human expertise created a blind spot that sophisticated attackers were exploiting with growing boldness. Frustrated by the cybersecurity team's unwillingness to investigate her findings, Elena decided to pursue alternative approaches to gathering evidence and building support for her concerns. She began reaching out to contacts in other organizations who might have experience with attacks against legacy systems, hoping to find corroboration for her analysis or additional insights into the methods she was observing. These informal consultations revealed that similar attacks were occurring elsewhere in the financial services industry, though most organizations were unaware of the intrusions due to the same blind spots in their security monitoring. Elena's investigation expanded beyond her own organization as she discovered connections between the attacks against Meridian Financial and similar intrusions targeting other companies with significant legacy system infrastructure. The attackers appeared to be conducting a coordinated campaign against multiple targets, using knowledge of older system architectures to penetrate organizations that had focused their security investments on protecting modern technology while neglecting the ancient computers that still performed critical functions. The scope and coordination of these attacks suggested a level of sophistication that went beyond typical cybercrime, pointing toward state-sponsored actors or highly organized criminal enterprises with specific strategic objectives. Elena's analysis of the attack infrastructure revealed connections to previously identified threat groups that had been linked to advanced persistent threat campaigns against financial institutions and critical infrastructure organizations. The targeting of legacy systems represented a new tactical approach that exploited gaps in security coverage while avoiding the sophisticated defenses that protected more visible network assets. Elena's growing understanding of the threat landscape prompted her to intensify her defensive efforts, implementing additional monitoring and protection measures for the legacy systems under her care. She developed custom intrusion detection scripts that could identify the specific attack signatures she had observed, creating an early warning system that complemented the organization's primary security infrastructure. These tools were necessarily different from commercial security products, designed specifically to address the unique characteristics and vulnerabilities of older system architectures. The ancient computers responded to Elena's enhanced monitoring with the same reliable performance they had demonstrated throughout their decades of operation, but their logs now told a different story about the digital environment in which they operated. The steady flow of transaction data and routine system communications was interspersed with evidence of ongoing reconnaissance and exploitation attempts that were invisible to less focused monitoring approaches. Elena's detailed knowledge of normal system behavior allowed her to identify subtle anomalies that indicated the presence of sophisticated attackers who understood how to blend their activities with legitimate operations. Elena's defensive measures began to yield results as her custom detection tools identified new attack attempts and provided early warning of escalating threat activity. She discovered that the attackers were adapting their methods in response to increased security attention, shifting to more sophisticated techniques that were harder to detect but also more resource-intensive to implement. This evolution in attack methods provided additional evidence of the sophistication and persistence of the threat actors involved. The cat-and-mouse game between Elena and the attackers intensified as both sides refined their techniques and capabilities. Elena's understanding of the legacy systems gave her advantages in detecting and analyzing attack methods, while the attackers' sophisticated infrastructure and technical expertise allowed them to adapt quickly to defensive countermeasures. Conflict was playing out in the digital shadows where ancient computers continued their critical work, largely invisible to the sophisticated security tools that protected the rest of the organization's infrastructure. Elena's isolation within the organization became more pronounced as her investigation revealed the scope and severity of the threats that others refused to acknowledge. The basement where she worked felt increasingly like a bunker where she maintained solitary vigilance against attackers that her colleagues didn't believe existed. The mechanical sounds of the legacy systems provided a constant reminder of the digital battle being waged in systems that most people considered obsolete, but that Elena knew were still vital to the organization's operations. The weight of knowledge about ongoing attacks created pressure that Elena struggled to manage within the constraints of organizational politics and professional hierarchy. She knew that the legacy systems were compromised and that sophisticated Attackers were preparing for operations that could cause significant damage to the organization and its clients. Yet her attempts to communicate these concerns were consistently dismissed by colleagues who trusted automated systems over human analysis and who viewed her expertise with older technology as irrelevant to contemporary security challenges. Elena's documentation of the attacks became increasingly comprehensive as she worked to build an irrefutable case that would force the organization to take defensive action. She created detailed technical analysis reports that explained exactly how the attackers were exploiting specific system vulnerabilities, timeline charts that showed the progression of intrusion activities, and risk assessments that outlined the potential consequences of successful attacks. Her work went far beyond what was required for her official role, driven by professional responsibility and growing alarm about threats that only she seemed to recognize. The ancient computers that surrounded Elena had become both the battlefield and the weapons in a conflict between human expertise and artificial intelligence, between patient analysis and automated detection, between understanding gained through experience and confidence placed in technological solutions. The legacy systems held secrets that revealed the limitations of over-reliance on modern security tools while demonstrating the continued value of human judgment in understanding complex technical environments. Elena's investigation had uncovered a sophisticated campaign by advanced threat actors who understood how to exploit gaps in contemporary security, coverage by targeting systems that were too old to be properly monitored by artificial intelligence platforms. The attackers possessed deep technical knowledge of legacy system architectures and had developed innovative methods for conducting intrusions that were invisible to signature-based detection while remaining persistent enough to support long-term operations within compromised environments. The evidence Elena had gathered painted a picture of systematic compromise that extended beyond her own organization to include other financial institutions and critical infrastructure providers that relied on similar legacy system architectures. The coordinated nature of these attacks suggested strategic objectives that went beyond typical cybercrime motivations, pointing toward state-sponsored activities or highly organized criminal enterprises with specific operational goals that required extended access to sensitive systems and data. As autumn progressed and the attacks against the legacy systems became more frequent and sophisticated, Elena prepared for what she knew would be a critical confrontation with the organizational culture that valued technological solutions over human expertise. The evidence she had gathered was comprehensive and compelling, but presenting it effectively would require her to challenge fundamental assumptions about security, technology, and the relative value of human versus artificial intelligence in protecting complex digital infrastructures. The basement laboratory where Elena had conducted her investigation represented more than just a workspace. It had become a symbol of the tension between old and new approaches to understanding and protecting digital systems. The ancient computers continued their reliable operation while serving as both the target of sophisticated attacks and the source of insights that modern security tools had missed. Elena's patient analysis of their behavior had revealed truths that expensive artificial intelligence platforms had overlooked, demonstrating that wisdom sometimes emerged from unexpected sources and that the most important discoveries often came from paying attention to details that others found boring or irrelevant. Elena's preparation for the next phase of her campaign to convince colleagues about the reality of the threats they faced involved not only technical documentation, but also strategic thinking about how to present evidence in ways that would overcome organizational bias and professional skepticism. She understood that challenging the effectiveness of expensive security systems would be seen as questioning the competence of the people who had selected and implemented those systems, creating defensive reactions that could undermine even the most compelling evidence. The legacy systems that had become Elena's allies in this investigation continued their steady work, processing transactions and maintaining logs with the same dedication they had shown throughout their decades of operation. But their role had evolved beyond simple data processing to become sensors in a digital early warning system that only Elena knew how to read. The ancient computers were telling a story about sophisticated threats and organizational vulnerabilities that would require courage as well as expertise to address effectively. Elena's growing understanding of the attack campaign had revealed not only technical details about exploitation methods, but also strategic insights about how sophisticated adversaries could exploit organizational blind spots and cultural biases to achieve their objectives. The attackers had succeeded not only because of their technical skills, but also because they understood how modern organizations thought about security and where those assumptions created exploitable weaknesses. The combination of technical sophistication and strategic thinking made them formidable opponents who required equally sophisticated and strategic responses. The ancient computers hummed quietly in their basement sanctuary, processing the digital communications that connected Meridian Financial to the broader world of electronic commerce and data exchange. But hidden within those routine communications were the signatures of an ongoing attack that threatened not only the organization's data and systems but also its clients' financial security and the integrity of the broader financial services infrastructure. Elena had become the sentinel standing guard over systems that others had forgotten, watching for threats that sophisticated artificial intelligence had failed to detect, and preparing for a confrontation that would test whether human expertise could triumph over organizational inertia and technological overconfidence. 6 months after the breach that changed everything, Elena stood before an auditorium filled with cybersecurity professionals from across the financial services industry. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as she prepared to deliver the keynote address at the International Legacy Systems Security Summit, an event that had been created specifically to address the vulnerabilities her investigation had exposed. The irony was not lost on her that she was now being celebrated for expertise that had once been dismissed as irrelevant to modern security challenges. The transformation in Elena's professional standing had been profound and far-reaching. Her promotion to Chief Legacy Systems Security Officer had created an entirely new category of cybersecurity leadership, recognizing that the intersection of old and new technology required specialized knowledge that traditional security training programs had never addressed. Organizations throughout the industry were scrambling to identify their own ancient computer assets and understand how these systems might be vulnerable to the types of sophisticated attacks Elena had uncovered. Elena's presentation began with a technical demonstration that would have been impossible just months earlier. The stage featured a carefully reconstructed version of her original basement laboratory, complete with functional replicas of the IBM mainframe, DEC minicomputer, and Unix workstations that had served as her early warning system during the attack campaign. The ancient computers hummed quietly on stage, their mechanical sounds audible throughout the auditorium as Elena explained how these seemingly obsolete machines had detected threats that billion-dollar AI security platforms had completely missed. The audience of seasoned security professionals listened with rapt attention as Elena walked them through the timeline of her investigation, explaining how patient analysis of system logs and network traffic had revealed patterns that sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms had classified as benign background noise. Her presentation included live demonstrations of the monitoring techniques she had developed, showing how manual analysis of legacy system behavior could identify anomalies that automated tools consistently overlooked. The technical details of Elena's methodology fascinated an audience that had spent careers focused on cutting-edge security technologies. Her approach represented a fundamental shift in thinking about threat detection, emphasizing the value of deep system knowledge and patient observation over the automated pattern recognition that dominated contemporary cybersecurity practice. The techniques she demonstrated were necessarily labor-intensive and required specialized expertise, but they had proven capable of detecting sophisticated attacks that evaded even the most advanced artificial intelligence systems. Elena's presentation revealed that the attack campaign she had uncovered was far more extensive than initially realized. International intelligence agencies had confirmed that similar operations were being conducted against critical infrastructure organizations worldwide, with attackers specifically targeting legacy systems that were invisible to modern security. Monitoring. The campaign represented a strategic shift in advanced persistent threat operations, exploiting blind spots created by over-reliance on artificial intelligence, while targeting systems that remained essential to organizational operations. Despite their apparent obsolescence, the implications of these discoveries extended beyond individual organizations to challenge fundamental assumptions about cybersecurity strategy and investment priorities. Elena's research had demonstrated that focusing security resources exclusively on protecting modern systems created exploitable vulnerabilities in older infrastructure that attackers could leverage to achieve their objectives. The ancient computers that many organizations considered liabilities had become critical assets that required protection measures, specifically tailored to their unique architectures and communication protocols. Elena's expanded team now included specialists in mainframe security, minicomputer forensics, and legacy network protocol analysis, representing expertise areas that had been considered obsolete just years earlier. The group had developed training programs that taught modern cybersecurity professionals how to understand and protect systems that predated their formal education and professional experience. The curriculum combined historical technical knowledge with contemporary threat intelligence, creating hybrid expertise that could bridge the gap between old and new technologies. The basement laboratory that had once been Elena's solitary workspace had evolved into a research center that attracted visitors from government agencies, academic institutions, and private organizations seeking to understand how legacy systems could be protected against sophisticated adversaries. The facility maintained operational examples of dozens of different ancient computer systems, creating a living museum that served both educational and operational purposes. Researchers could study how these machines operated while developing new approaches to monitoring and protecting similar systems in production environments. Elena's influence extended beyond technical methodology to reshape organizational thinking about the relationship between human expertise and artificial intelligence. In cybersecurity operations, her experience had demonstrated that effective security required collaboration between human analysts and automated systems rather than replacement of human judgment with artificial intelligence. The most sophisticated attacks could be detected only through the combination of machine processing power and human insight, with each approach contributing capabilities that the other lacked. The financial impact of Elena's work had been substantial and measurable. The attack campaign she had uncovered would have resulted in billions of dollars in losses across the financial services industry if it had been allowed to continue undetected. Her early warning had enabled coordinated defensive measures that prevented data theft and system disruption on a massive scale, while her analysis techniques had been adopted by organizations worldwide to protect their own legacy system infrastructure. Elena's story had become a case study taught in cybersecurity programs at major universities, illustrating principles about threat detection, organizational behavior, and the integration of human and artificial intelligence capabilities. Students learned about the importance of diverse expertise, the dangers of technological overconfidence, and the value of patient analysis in understanding complex technical systems. Her experience provided concrete examples of how individual initiative and specialized knowledge could address security challenges that conventional approaches had failed to solve. The recognition Elena had received included awards from professional organizations, government agencies, and international security consortiums that acknowledged her contributions to protecting critical digital infrastructure. However, she remained most proud of the practical impact her work had achieved in improving security for organizations that relied on legacy systems to support their operations. The ancient computers that had been her original partners in discovery continued to serve as symbols of the value that could be found in overlooked resources when approached with appropriate expertise and patience. Elena's research had revealed that legacy systems possessed inherent security advantages that modern systems often lacked, including simplified architectures that were easier to monitor and protect, detailed logging capabilities that provided comprehensive audit trails, and communication protocols that were less vulnerable to contemporary attack techniques. These advantages had been obscured by assumptions about technological progress and the superiority of newer systems. But Elena's analysis demonstrated that age could be an asset rather than a liability when properly leveraged. The integration of Elena's methodologies into standard cybersecurity practice had required significant changes in professional training and organizational structure. Security teams needed to include specialists who understood older technologies, alongside experts in contemporary threat landscapes, creating multidisciplinary approaches that could address the full spectrum of organizational digital assets. The collaboration between these different expertise areas had proven more effective than either approach could achieve independently. Elena's influence on industry standards had been formalized through her participation in developing new guidelines for legacy system security that were adopted by regulatory agencies and professional organizations worldwide. These standards recognized that critical infrastructure often included ancient computers that required specialized protection measures, and they established requirements for organizations to inventory, assess, and protect legacy systems that might otherwise be overlooked by contemporary security programs. The international scope of Elena's impact reflected the global nature of the vulnerabilities she had identified. Organizations in Europe, Asia, and other regions had discovered their own legacy system blind spots and implemented Elena's detection methodologies to address previously unknown security risks. The collaboration between security professionals worldwide had created an informal network of expertise that shared information about legacy system threats and defensive techniques. Elena's work had also influenced the development of new artificial intelligence algorithms that were specifically designed to complement human analysis rather than replace it. These hybrid systems combined machine learning capabilities with interfaces that supported detailed human investigation and analysis, creating tools that leverage the strengths of both approaches while mitigating their respective limitations. The development of these collaborative AI systems represented a significant shift from the automated replacement paradigm that had dominated previous artificial intelligence development in cybersecurity. The ancient computers that had started Elena's journey continued to operate in their expanded research facility, serving both practical and symbolic purposes in the ongoing effort to understand and protect legacy digital infrastructure. Their mechanical sounds provided a constant reminder of the technological heritage that underpinned modern digital systems, while their reliable operation demonstrated that age and sophistication were not mutually exclusive qualities in complex technical systems. Elena's current role involved overseeing security assessments for organizations worldwide, helping them identify and protect legacy systems that might be vulnerable to sophisticated attacks. Her team had developed standardized methodologies for legacy system inventory, risk assessment, and protection planning that could be adapted to different organizational contexts and technological environments. The approach emphasized understanding existing systems rather than simply replacing them with newer alternatives. The research facility Elena directed had become a center of excellence for understanding the security implications of technological Diversity in organizational infrastructure. Projects ranged from developing new monitoring techniques for specific legacy system architectures to creating training programs that taught modern cybersecurity professionals how to work effectively with ancient computers. The facility maintained partnerships with universities, government agencies, and private organizations that shared interests in protecting critical digital heritage. Elena's influence extended beyond technical cybersecurity to broader discussions about technological sustainability and the value of maintaining diverse approaches to solving complex problems. Her experience demonstrated that innovation often emerged from unexpected combinations of old and new knowledge, and that dismissing older approaches could create vulnerabilities that sophisticated adversaries were prepared to exploit. The lesson: applied beyond cybersecurity to other fields where technological change created gaps between past expertise and current practice. The legacy of Elena's discovery continued to evolve as new threats emerged that targeted the intersection of ancient and modern digital systems. Her methodologies provided frameworks for understanding these hybrid attack scenarios, while her research facility served as a laboratory for developing defensive techniques that could protect complex technological ecosystems that spanned multiple generations of hardware and software development. Elena reflected on the journey that had transformed her from an isolated system administrator into a recognized expert whose insights had reshaped cybersecurity practice worldwide. The ancient computers that surrounded her continued their steady work, processing data and maintaining logs with the same reliability they had demonstrated throughout their decades of operation. Their persistence had become a metaphor for the value of patient expertise and careful attention to details that others might overlook. The story of Elena's success represented more than individual achievement. It demonstrated the continuing importance of human insight in understanding and protecting the complex technical systems that supported modern civilization. Her experience provided evidence that wisdom could emerge from unexpected sources, and that the most important discoveries often came from paying attention to things that others dismissed as obsolete or irrelevant. As Elena prepared for her next presentation to an international audience of cybersecurity professionals, she remained mindful of the lessons her journey had taught about the relationship between innovation and tradition, between human expertise and artificial intelligence, and between individual initiative and organizational change. The ancient computers hummed quietly around her, their mechanical voices joining in a digital chorus that spoke of reliability, patience, and the enduring value of understanding systems deeply enough to protect them effectively. The future Elena envisioned involved continued collaboration between human analysts and artificial intelligence systems, with each approach contributing unique capabilities to address the evolving challenges of protecting digital infrastructure. Her work had established foundations for this collaborative approach while demonstrating that effective cybersecurity required respect for both technological innovation and the accumulated wisdom of systems that had proven their worth through decades of reliable operation. 3 years had passed since Elena's discovery changed the cybersecurity landscape forever, and the world had embraced what historians would later call the digital renaissance. In boardrooms across Silicon Valley, executives who had once dismissed legacy systems as technological dead weight now spoke reverently about the wisdom embedded in ancient code. The phrase vintage computing had replaced obsolete technology in corporate vocabularies, as organizations worldwide recognized that their oldest digital assets might also be their most secure. Elena walked through the corridors of the newly established Institute for Computational Heritage, a sprawling complex in Northern California that had become the global epicenter for legacy system research and protection. The building itself embodied the philosophy Elena had championed, with cutting-edge environmental controls protecting rooms filled with computers from every era of digital history. The contrast between sleek modern architecture and the warm amber glow of vintage monitors created an atmosphere that visitors describe as both futuristic and nostalgically comforting. The institute operated as part museum, part research laboratory, and part operational cybersecurity facility. Teams of researchers worked alongside functioning examples of every major computer system developed since the 1960s, studying not just how these machines operated, but why their designs had endured and what lessons they offered for contemporary security challenges. Elena's original basement laboratory had inspired a revolution in thinking about technological heritage and its practical applications to modern problems. Dr. Sarah Kim, Elena's former adversary from the AI development community, now served as Elena's former adversary from the AI development community, now served as the Institute's Director of Human-Machine Collaboration Research. The transformation in their relationship reflected broader changes in how the technology industry understood the relationship between artificial intelligence and human expertise. Sarah's current projects focused on developing AI systems that could learn from the design principles embedded in legacy computing, creating modern algorithms that incorporated the reliability and transparency that characterized older technological approaches. Elena's daily routine at the Institute began with a ritual that had remained unchanged, despite her elevated status and international recognition. She still started each morning by listening to the mechanical symphony created by dozens of ancient computers as they powered up and began their daily processing cycles. The sounds had become her meditation, a reminder of the patient persistence that had sustained her through months of professional isolation and organizational resistance. The Institute's main research floor buzzed with activity as interdisciplinary teams tackled projects that would have been inconceivable just years earlier. Computer historians worked alongside cybersecurity analysts to understand how design decisions made decades ago influenced contemporary vulnerability patterns. Anthropologists studied the cultural factors that led organizations to abandon or preserve different technologies, while economists calculated the financial impact of maintaining diverse technological ecosystems rather than pursuing uniform modernization strategies. Elena's current research focused on developing what she called temporal security architecture, an approach that recognized that effective cybersecurity required understanding and protecting systems across multiple generations of technological development. The concept challenged fundamental assumptions about security strategy that emphasize standardization and modernization, proposing instead that diversity and technological heritage could be sources of strength rather than weakness in defending against sophisticated adversaries. The practical applications of Elena's temporal security concepts were being tested in real-world environments through partnerships with organizations worldwide. Major financial institutions had established their own legacy system protection programs based on Elena's methodologies, while government agencies were reassessing their approaches to critical infrastructure security to account for the ancient computers that still performed essential functions in power grids, transportation systems, and communication networks. Elena's influence had extended beyond cybersecurity to inspire broader cultural changes in how society approached technological change and innovation. Universities had established programs in digital archaeology that taught students to understand and preserve computational heritage, while museums worldwide had created exhibits that celebrated the artistry and engineering excellence embedded in vintage computing systems. The ancient computers that had once been relegated to storage rooms and disposal facilities now occupied places of honor in institutions dedicated to preserving human technological achievement. The international scope of Elena's impact was evident in the Institute's daily operations, which included researchers from every continent and collaborative projects that addressed regional variations in legacy system deployment and protection. The diversity of technological heritage across different cultures and economic systems had created unique security challenges that required specialized expertise and culturally sensitive approaches to implementation. Elena's work had revealed that the relationship between old and new technology was far more complex and interdependent than most organizations had realized. Modern systems often relied on legacy infrastructure in ways that were poorly documented and inadequately protected, creating systemic vulnerabilities that could cascade through entire technological ecosystems. Her research had identified these hidden dependencies and developed methods for securing the connections between systems that spanned decades of technological evolution. The Institute's success had attracted attention from venture capital firms and technology companies seeking to commercialize Elena's discoveries. However, Elena had chosen to maintain the organization's research focus rather than pursuing purely commercial applications, believing that the fundamental principles she had uncovered required continued investigation before they could be responsibly implemented at scale. The decision reflected her understanding that lasting security required patience and thoroughness, rather than rapid deployment of partially understood solutions. Elena's personal transformation had been as profound as her professional achievements. The isolation and frustration that had characterized her early career had been replaced by a sense of purpose and connection to a global community of researchers and practitioners who shared her appreciation for the wisdom embedded in technological heritage. She had learned to balance individual expertise with collaborative leadership, using her platform to amplify the voices of others who brought different perspectives to understanding complex technological challenges. The ancient computers that had been Elena's original companions in discovery now served as ambassadors for a new approach to technological stewardship. Visitors to the Institute regularly expressed amazement at the reliability and elegance of systems they had expected to be primitive and awkward. The machine's continued operation demonstrated that technological progress was not simply a matter of replacing old with new, but rather of understanding how different approaches to solving problems could complement and strengthen each other. Elena's legacy extended beyond specific technical achievements to influence fundamental questions about the relationship between humans and technology in modern society. Her story had become a touchstone for discussions about technological sustainability, the value of preserving diverse approaches to problem solving, and the importance of maintaining human expertise alongside artificial intelligence capabilities. The lessons of her journey resonated across fields ranging from environmental conservation to organizational management, wherever the tension between innovation and preservation shaped important decisions. As Elena prepared for another day of research and collaboration at the Institute, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a basement filled with overlooked computers to a position of international leadership in reshaping how society approached technological heritage and security. The path had taught her that the most important discoveries often emerged from patient attention to details that others dismissed as irrelevant, and that individual expertise could achieve global impact when combined with persistence, integrity, and the courage to challenge conventional assumptions. The ancient computers hummed quietly around her, their mechanical voices joining in the digital chorus that had become the soundtrack of the digital renaissance. Their continued operation served as proof that wisdom could be found in unexpected places and that the most valuable innovations sometimes emerged from understanding the past rather than simply pursuing the future. Elena's work had demonstrated that true progress required respect for heritage as well as enthusiasm for innovation, and that the most secure digital future would be built on foundations that honored the accumulated wisdom of technological ancestors, while embracing the possibilities that emerged from thoughtful evolution rather than revolutionary replacement. The story of Elena's discovery and its transformative impact continued to evolve as new generations of researchers and practitioners built upon the foundations she had established. The Institute for Computational Heritage had become more than a research facility. It was a symbol of humanity's commitment to preserving and learning from its technological achievements while continuing to innovate in ways that honored the lessons of the past. Elena's ancient computers had proven that some victories transcended individual success to become lasting contributions to human knowledge and capability, creating legacies that would endure long after the specific circumstances of their discovery had become historical footnotes. The digital renaissance that Elena had helped to inspire represented more than a shift in cybersecurity practice. It embodied a fundamental change in how humanity approached the relationship between past and future, between tradition and innovation, and between individual expertise and collective wisdom. Her journey from isolated system administrator to global leader demonstrated that patience, persistence, and respect for overlooked knowledge could achieve transformations that extended far beyond their original scope, creating ripple effects that touched every aspect of how society understood and protected its most critical digital infrastructure. 25 years after Elena Vasquez first heard the mechanical whispers of ancient computers speaking truths that artificial intelligence could not comprehend, she stood in the Memorial Hall of Digital Pioneers at the Institute for Computational Heritage. The hall had been established to honor individuals whose work had fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with technology, and Elena's portrait now hung alongside those of Ada Lovelace, Alan Turing, and Grace Hopper. The inscription beneath her image reads simply, "She taught us that wisdom speaks in whispers, not algorithms." Elena had aged gracefully, her hair now silver but her eyes still holding the same intensity that had driven her to pursue patterns others dismissed as noise. At 73, she moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that the most important discoveries required patience rather than haste. The institute around her had evolved into something approaching a technological cathedral, where the sacred and the scientific merged in the soft amber glow of monitors that had been faithfully maintained for decades, beyond their intended lifespans. The world Elena surveyed from the Memorial Hall bore little resemblance to the one she had known as a young system administrator. The digital renaissance she had sparked had transformed not just cybersecurity, but the entire relationship between humanity and its technological creations. Cities now featured heritage computing districts where ancient machines operated alongside quantum processors, their diverse capabilities creating resilient digital ecosystems that could withstand attacks that would cripple more homogeneous systems. Educational curricula worldwide now included mandatory courses in technological empathy, teaching students to understand and communicate with systems, regardless of their age or architectural philosophy. Children learned to appreciate the personality quirks of vintage computers alongside the capabilities of contemporary AI, developing intuitive understanding of how different technological approaches could contribute to solving complex problems. The generation that had grown up with this balanced perspective produced innovations that neither pure modernization nor rigid traditionalism could have achieved. Elena's final research project had consumed the last decade of her career, exploring what she called the consciousness continuum in computational systems. Her investigation suggested that the reliability and longevity that characterized ancient computers resulted from design philosophies that prioritized sustainability and transparency over raw performance. These qualities had created machines that developed what could only be described as technological wisdom through decades of consistent operation and accumulated experience. The implications of Elena's research extended beyond computer science to influence fields ranging from architecture to organizational psychology. The principle that longevity created wisdom had been applied to urban planning, where cities began preserving and integrating older infrastructure rather than simply replacing it with newer alternatives. Corporate structures evolved to value institutional memory alongside innovation, recognizing that organizations that honored their heritage while embracing change achieved greater stability and resilience than those that pursued endless transformation. Elena's personal archives, housed in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Institute, contained detailed documentation of every significant discovery from her career. The collection included not just technical analysis and research findings, but also philosophical reflections on the nature of human-machine relationships and the role of patience in understanding complex systems. Scholars from diverse disciplines regularly access these materials, finding insights that applied to challenges far removed from cybersecurity and legacy computing. The ancient computers that had been Elena's original collaborators continued to operate throughout the Institute, their mechanical sounds creating an audio signature that visitors described as both comforting and mystical. The machines had outlived multiple generations of supposedly superior replacements, their continued functionality serving as practical demonstration of the design principles Elena had championed. Maintenance of these systems had become a specialized art form, with technicians training for years to understand the subtle requirements of each vintage architecture. Elena's influence on artificial intelligence development had been particularly profound, leading to the creation of what researchers called collaborative intelligence systems that were designed to work alongside human expertise rather than replace. If these hybrid approaches had proven far more effective than either purely automated or purely human analysis in addressing complex problems that required both computational power and intuitive understanding. The AI industry had moved beyond the replacement paradigm to embrace partnership models that leverage the unique strengths of both biological and artificial intelligence. The global security framework that had emerged from Elena's discoveries now protected not just individual organizations, but entire technological ecosystems spanning continents and cultures. The recognition that ancient systems formed critical components of modern infrastructure had led to international treaties governing the protection and preservation of computational heritage. Nations competed not just in developing new technologies, but in maintaining and protecting the diverse legacy systems that provided resilience and stability to interconnected digital networks. Elena's teaching at the Institute had shaped 3 generations of researchers who carried her principles into fields she had never directly engaged. Her students had become leaders in sustainable technology development, digital archaeology, and human-computer interaction design. They applied her methods of patient observation and systematic analysis to challenges ranging from climate change modeling to space exploration, demonstrating that the lessons learned from ancient computers had universal applicability to complex problem-solving. The social movements Elena had inadvertently inspired extended far beyond technology to influence broader cultural attitudes toward progress and change. The concept of velocity wisdom, derived from her observations about the value of slower, more deliberate approaches to innovation, had been adopted by movements promoting sustainable development, mindful consumption, and balanced work-life integration. Society had learned to question the assumption that faster always meant better, embracing approaches that prioritized thoughtfulness over speed. Elena's memoirs, published on her 70th birthday, had become essential reading in courses on leadership, innovation, and organizational change. The book's central message, that individual expertise combined with institutional patience could achieve transformations that seemed impossible to those focused on immediate results, resonated across disciplines and cultures. Her story provided hope for anyone working to address complex challenges that required long-term perspective and persistent effort. The Institute's newest wing housed the Elena Vasquez Archive for Technological Wisdom, a research facility dedicated to studying how human insight could complement artificial intelligence in addressing humanity's greatest challenges. The archive's mission reflected Elena's belief that the most important discoveries emerged from the intersection of technical expertise and philosophical understanding, requiring both rigorous analysis and deep appreciation for the context and history that shaped technological development. Elena's final public appearance had been at the Global Conference on Computational Heritage, where she delivered a keynote address that summarized 5 decades of research and reflection on the relationship between humans and their technological creations. Her message emphasized that the future of human civilization depended not on choosing between old and new approaches, but on understanding how different technologies could work together to create systems that were more resilient, more sustainable, and more responsive to human needs than any single approach could achieve. The ancient computers that surrounded Elena in her final years had become more than research subjects or professional tools. They were companions whose reliable presence provided comfort and continuity in a world that often seemed to change too rapidly for human adaptation. Their mechanical voices joined in a digital chorus that spoke of endurance, patience, and the accumulated wisdom that emerged from consistent service to human needs across decades of technological evolution. Elena's legacy lived on in the thousands of researchers, practitioners, and leaders who had been influenced by her work and philosophy. The principles she had discovered through patient analysis of ancient computers had become foundational elements of approaches to education, governance, environmental protection, and social innovation. Her demonstration that overlooked wisdom could reshape entire fields had inspired others to look beyond conventional sources of expertise and to value persistence and deep understanding over quick solutions and popular trends. As Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from a basement filled with forgotten machines to a position of global influence, she understood that her greatest achievement had been not any specific technical discovery, but rather the demonstration that individual conviction and expertise could create change that extended far beyond their original scope. The ancient computers had taught her that some truths required patience to discover and persistence to defend, but that such truths, once revealed, could transform the world in ways that their discoverers never imagined. The story of Elena's discoveries had become more than historical record. It had evolved into modern mythology that reminded each new generation that wisdom often spoke in whispers that only careful listeners could hear. Her ancient computers continued their faithful operation, processing data and maintaining logs, with the same dedication they had shown throughout their extended lifespans, serving as eternal reminders that some forms of excellence transcended the limitations of their original design and achieved something approaching technological immortality. Elena's final gift to humanity was the understanding that progress meant more than simply moving forward. It required the wisdom to recognize what should be preserved alongside what should be changed. Her ancient computers had proven that some achievements were worth maintaining across generations, not as museum pieces, but as active contributors to humanity's ongoing technological journey. The mechanical symphony they created would continue long after Elena's passing, a digital heartbeat that connected past discoveries to future possibilities through the steady rhythm of processors that had learned to see patterns others missed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.